During scheduled weekly maintenance on September 17th, we will adjust classes that have been over and underperforming in the last few days of the war within season 1. All right. Demon Hunter. Fix an issue that caused I-beam's damage to be reduced beyond 1 target instead of 5. Yeah, I heard Demon Hunter was just completely bugged. Okay. Fix an issue that caused I-beam's damage to be reduced beyond 1 target instead of 5. Fix an issue that prevented I-beam from benefiting. Dude, Demon Hunter just got 3 changes that are just bug fixes. So I guess their whole class, their whole I-beam shit was just bugged. Okay, so they should be better now, assuming. No, Boomy buffs. No, I hate Boomkins. I'm sick of them. All ability damage increased by 6%. Star Surge damage increased by 16%. Starfall damage increase not applied to PvP. Lunar Call increased Starfire damage to his primary target by 80%, was 65. The bonus remains 50% PvP, I see. Okay. I don't want to go back to fighting Boomy Dragon ever again, so we'll see how that goes. Feral got a 3% damage buff overall, 6% to Rip, 3% Bite, 10% Feral Frenzy. Okay. Resto Druid. Does not affect PvP. Druids have nothing. They have nothing. Okay. All healing increased by 8%, does not affect PvP. But they got a damage buff, so Wrath, Starfire, and Star Surge got 20% damage buff. Okay. Disintegrate damage increased by 10% for Evoker. So you don't really disintegrate much on Evoker anymore, like Pres Evoker. It's just not really worth the global, so maybe a little bit of damage there. It still does decent damage, but maybe now does a little bit more overall. Devastation, Eternity Surge damage increased by 10%. So they gave Dev damage buffs, which is interesting. So 2 of Devastation Evoker's main damage spells have gotten 10% buffed. So I feel like Dev Evoker already pumps. That's really interesting. Living Bombs, Explosion. Visual now only plays on the unit that is the Living Bomb rather than each unit damaged by the explosion. Okay. Meteorite damage reduced by 15%. So most people play Sun Fury, right? Burnout power damage bonus for Arcane Blast reduced to 20%, was 30. Okay, so they nerfed Sun Fury for Arcane. Fire Mage got a 6% overall damage buff, 25% to Living Bomb. So Fire Mage right now does poop for damn. They do nothing. So slight buff to them. Okay. Mistweaver all healing increased by 3%. Tiger Palm damage increased by 15%, does not affect PvP. Rising Sun Kick damage increased by 15%, does not affect PvP. Okay. So 3% buff to Monk overall. Not bad. I mean, Mistweaver healing doesn't feel the greatest right now, so 3% is helpful. Oh my god. Paladins rejoice! Holy pally. All healing reduced by 6%, does not affect PvP. 60% damage to Judgment, 60% to Crusader Strike, 20% for Hammer of Wrath. They did nerf Avenging Crusader though, so Melee Wings got nerfed, but they buffed the damage, which should kind of offset it. Holy Prism single target damage increased by 100%, and area effect damage increased by 50%. Okay, so they actually gave Pally pretty good damage buffs. That's pretty cool. They reduced the damage of Dawnlight for Ret, so their hero talent. So these buffs are pretty cool. Let's see. Am I my Pally? Let's see. So my Judgment, the last game, was hitting for... My highest one was 128,000 normal. So... yeah, so my Judgment, my highest one was 150 normal. So, I mean, over 200k now for Judgment is pretty solid. Crusader Strike 60% buff, buffed Hammer of Wrath, and then Prism got buffed as well. So Prism got a 100% damage buff, which means... how much would I do with Prism in some of these games? You can't see, but I'm going to look. Yeah, Prism would do about 200k. If I actually did play Prism, which I didn't play this last game, it would actually do about 100k, 150k, 150k if you target a friendly person. If you target enemies, it would do around 250 or so. So that's pretty decent, I would say. That's a nice buff to have for Prism. It makes Prism more valuable. Shadow, all damage increased by 6%. So Shadow Priest already does pretty decent damage, I would say, but they got a 6% buff. That's helpful for them. They still have a problem with casting a lot, but 6% damage overall is if you're ever going to get buffed 5-6% on something, it's normally pretty good. unless you actually do 0 damage. So like right here, Fire Mage got 6%. Not sure how that's going to be because Fire Mage does 0 damage right now. Pally was good in PvE, I think, yeah. Okay, so they nerfed Psychic Link as well a little bit, 25% instead of 30% damage transfer. Outlaw Rogue, all ability damage reduced by 4%, dispatch reduced by 10%. So I guess Outlaw was good in PvE because they got a pretty substantial damage nerf. So they buffed their tier but nerfed their other spells. So Outlaw got a pretty big damage nerf, so they must be good in PvE. That's kind of crazy to see. You don't ever see them in Arena right now. Enhanced Shaman got a 4% damage buff. Also pretty crazy because I think Enhanced got a damage buff before and they were pretty competent. They got another damage buff, so if you play Enhanced, good for you. They nerfed the Witch Doctor's talent though, which reduces their Wolf CD, and then they buffed their tier set. Oh, because the tier set. Okay, so now you can play. So the 2 set, the damage buff is just buffing them because they nerfed the 2 set. But I feel like this is just good in general because this is still pretty big because this affects everything. This affects Frost Strike. This affects their Ellie Blast. Not just these spells. So this is still a buff overall. This is still an overall buff. So slight buff to enhance. Okay. They buff Shaman damage. Okay. I don't even know how hard Lava Burst hits right now. I swear it hits for like 200k. So, I mean, you get more damage. Cool. They gave more damage to all the healers, it seems like. Or the healers that lack damage, at least. Not yet Monk, because Monk is going to get a damage buff in the anniversary patch. So, that's cool. Warlock. Demo Lock. Guys, Ven is going to be so happy. Demonable damage buff by 20%. Pact of the whatever. Summoned Doomguard damage increased by 45. Felguard damage increased by 15. So, Demo got a pretty big damage buff, it looks like. Right now, Demo Lock is one of the classes that we've talked about that they just feel like they do nothing. Their damage is so low, it seems like. So, damage buff to Demo. All right. Destro's kind of like that too. They buffed Destro. 6% damage buff overall. Dimensional Rift got buffed by 40%. Demon Fire got buffed by 40%. I don't think you play Channel Demon Fire, but they buff Rift and your overall damage by 6%. So, pretty big buff for Destro Lock, I would say. Mountain of Muscle and Scars increased damage dealt by 5%, was 4. So this is Warrior Hero talents. So they buffed the initial 2 hits of Demolish. I haven't seen anyone really play Demolish recently, so maybe that'll be really crazy for them again. Thunder Blast strikes. So they buffed both tiers. Or so they nerfed this part, but they buffed part of Colossus and part of the other hero talent for Warrior. Blaze Sword damage reduced by 10% for arms. Blaze Sword damage reduced by 10% for Fury. And Odin's Fury damage reduced by 15%. Okay. But then they buffed their Rampage damage from their Mountain Thane hero talents. Okay. All right. So those were the PvE overall changes. Now for PvP. So I'm going to be really surprised if Prez Evoker doesn't get any nerfs at all. And if they do get nerfed and it's nothing. So I'm going to be surprised if Prez Evoker dodges nerfs. But if they do get nerfed and it's something super minuscule, I will probably just smile because they've done this before. They've done this before. Well, Prez will be insanely broken and they'll be like, all right, minus 3% fire breath damage. So let's see. We can see it right there. Look, I already called it. Oh my God, I ruined the surprise for myself. God damn it. All right, so here we go. Death Knight. Frost Fever damage is no longer increased in PvP combat. Was 25%. Okay, so they nerfed Frost Decay dot. That's really weird. Like you don't see Frost Decay. That's really weird. And I feel like their dot isn't the issue. The icon for lesser anti-magic shells from Vesicle Shell has been updated to be distinct from regular anti-magic shell. Okay. Horseman's Aid effectiveness reduced by 15%. This is a pretty good nerf. The Horsemen are really annoying with their shells and stuff, so cool. Demon Hunter Havoc. The hunt damage and damage over time are now reduced by 15% PvP, was 28. So it looks like Demon Hunter got a fix to all their bugs with I-Beam, so they should be better now. And they also got a buff to the hunt because they're lowering the hunt damage reduction from 28% to 15%. So if you guys don't know, this is a buff. This is a buff. This is not a nerf. So hunt damage will be higher. The damage from the hunt will be higher, and their I-Beam should be fixed now. So Good damage buff for Demon Hunter, it looks like. And here we go, just like we talked about, Evoker. We literally just said that it'll probably be a very minuscule nerf, and it looks like that's what they decided to do. So they they nerfed Disintegrate overall by 20% in PvP, so this will affect Devastation as well. I don't know why they did it overall, because Pres Evoker Disintegrate doesn't really do anything, and then they only buffed it by 10%, so now it's technically nerfed by 10%. That's a really weird change, in my opinion. Preservation, Living Flame Healing reduced by 20%. So right off the bat, looking at this as somebody who competes and somebody who actively plays high-rated games, you know, BGs, Arena, Shuffle, 2s, 3s, and is very competitive, this change doesn't do anything. I think Pres Evokers are still going to be the best healer. The reason that I think they targeted Living Flame is because Living Flame procs off of your Empower spells now when you play Chrono Forge or Chrono Warden. You send out Living Flames when you Dream Breath and when you Spirit Bloom. You send out healing Living Flames when you Dream Breath and when you Spirit Bloom. You also have Living Flames that can cleave whenever you have the AoE talent or the AoE buff after you cast Fire Breath. And you get a lot of instant Living Flames that you can use for healing as well. So I think they realized that that Living Flame is really high on your healing breakdown for Evoker and decided to target that, which I think is an okay idea. I think they kind of just want to limit the amount of burst healing that Evoker has with their Living Flames and their Empower spells. But if I'm going to be honest, I don't think that this is really the problem with Evoker. I don't think this is necessarily a bad change. So I'm going to try to be serious for a moment and not, you know, not be dramatic and kind of be sarcastic. I think this is an okay change, but I really don't think that the problem with Evoker was their healing, especially with how heavy damage is right now. I don't think that the problem with Evoker is their healing. I think the biggest problem is their damage. Damage from Evoker is insane. Whenever you're fire breathing or you're casting Living Flames, you're deleting the enemy team. So when you run in, you tip the scales, you instant Fire Breath. That is the problem, I feel like, with Evoker, because you're automatically doing, when you tip the scales Fire Breath 3 people, you automatically do 6-7 million damage. Like, that's the problem with Evoker. So I do think this change is going to be noticeable, but I don't think this is going to take Evoker out of the #1 healer spot, because they simply just do more damage than everyone else. And I think that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that they have everything. They have CC, they have cooldowns, they have cooldowns for themselves. They're very tanky passively. They have really high HPS. They have really high mana. They have a bunch of CDR. They have good utility. They have a kick. They have crazy burst damage, and they have high sustain damage. And they have a lot of mobility, and they have a CC immunity. They have literally everything you could want. And what sets them apart, in my opinion, is the fact that their damage is not only higher than every healer in terms of their sustain, but their burst damage is higher than every healer, on top of having the best purge in the game with Fire Breath. So, do I think this nerf is big? I wouldn't say it's a big nerf, but I do think it's going to be noticeable. Like, I think this is a noticeable change. I'm not gonna knock the devs too hard on this buff. I think, or this nerf. I think this is definitely going to be noticeable, but I don't think it's going to be what stops Evoker from being so dominant, and I don't think it's the correct change. I don't think it's a bad change, but I don't think it's the one they should have taken. Or I don't think it's the approach they should have taken. I don't like when healers have their healing nerfed. Unless their healing is like egregiously OP, like when Druids got Treants, or when Shamans had Pack Spirit in BFA, or when Pally got reworked in Dragonflight, or when Holy Pally in Season 1 Shadowlands was just doing more healing than everybody by pressing Holy Shock. I don't think it's not only fun for other healers, but I don't think it's the right approach to nerf their healing unless it's that OP. So it's really unfortunate that that's kind of the approach they're going with, especially because damage right now is so high. I definitely would have liked a damage nerf on Pres Evoker. I think that's the main issue. Like their Fire Breath combined with the automatic Living Flames, I think that's the main issue. But at the end of the day, this is still a nerf. This is still going to be noticeable. And hopefully, on top of the other changes, we can kind of see a bit more variety in the healer meta. So we'll just have to see. But hopefully with this, we'll see a little bit more variety with the healer meta. I do think Presovoker will still be the best healer, but we might see more variety. So we'll see what happens. Let's move on. BM Hunters. So we all know BM Hunters kind of suck. I don't think anyone feels bad for that. If you guys feel bad, let me know in the comments, please. Yeah, let me know if you're one of those people that feels bad for BM Hunters, but I do not. I do not feel bad for this class being not the greatest. But they did end up buffing BM. So Kill Command got 15%, Cobra Shot got 15%, Kill Shot got 40%, and then their Barb Shot, which is one of their main damage spells with their big dot, got a 20% buff. So pretty big damage buffs across the board for BM Hunter. This definitely might make them more scary. Might make them scarier than they are currently. And I just really hope they're not broken because nobody likes fighting the pet classes. The pet classes are rough. Monk Mistweaver. Peace Weaver PvP talent now reduces the cooldown by 30 seconds. Was 60 seconds. Okay. So they nerfed Monk again. I'm assuming that they did this because BG Blitz is out and monks are really, really good in Battlegrounds. But I don't see why we keep knocking down a healer that's already at the bottom. Like when I look at all the healers, Pally and Mistweaver are at the bottom for PvP. And it seems like they keep getting like random nerfs, or like they'll get like a buff and then they'll get a nerf. And I don't know why they keep doing that, because they're not a problem right now in the meta. So I would assume that this is because of Battlegrounds. I can understand where they're coming from, because Peace Weaver, let's be honest, like Peace Weaver is really fucking OP into all of the casters, especially in a BG setting. But I feel like you could make the immunity a second less and that would be better. But nerfing the cooldown just makes it worse. Like when you nerf the cooldown of spells like that on a class like Monk, where it feels like their healing isn't enough and their cooldowns in terms of like they're helping their team AoE wise aren't the greatest. Like you have Revival, which was really good, and then they nerfed it, and then you have your Conduit spell now. So now they nerfed Revival, and then they nerfed it again, and then your Conduit spell isn't the greatest anyways. Nerfing these group healing talents is weird when you're already playing a healer that doesn't have the greatest like spread healing, I would say. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the Peace Weaver nerf. I feel like 2-minute cooldown for renewal was completely fine. So I don't feel too good about this nerf. I don't like seeing this. I feel like nerfing the immunity at least of Peace Weaver would have been better. So instead of a 2-second immunity, you could make it 1. So you still get some benefit from that, but it's not, you know, the extra second does actually matter. If you're going to have a buff that lasts for a little bit longer, you know, a few extra seconds, we all know how important those extra seconds are. Any of you guys watching, we all know the extra seconds, they make a big deal. So I don't really like the Peace Weaver change. That's really odd. I feel like it would have been better to just nerf the immunity, or maybe you can do like a slight healing nerf when it does, you know, more than 5 targets or something in PvP. Not sure, because I feel like this is a BG related talent. So kind of weird to see, but Monk is also going to be buffed a lot in the anniversary patch. So maybe this isn't that bad. Windwalker. Communion with damage increase is no longer reduced in PvP combat. So I don't even know what this is, but now it's not going to be nerfed in PvP. So good for them. I feel like Monk is just going to do more damage. That's what it looks like to me. Oh, wait, no. Wisdom of the Wall shadow damage is reduced. So they nerfed this. Yeah, we don't even know what this is. So let's move on from Windwalker. It looks like they just offset 2 spells. Paladin. Sanctified Plates now increases armor by 20%, stamina by 10%, and area of effect damage by 6% in PvP. What is Sanctified Plates right now? So Sanctified Plates is 12, 6, and 3. Okay, so instead of 12% armor, you get 20. Instead of 6% stamina, you get 10. Instead of 3% AoE reduction, you get 6. So pretty big buff to Sanctified Plates. That's interesting to see. Divine Protection's damage reduction increased by 50% in PvP combat. We saw this. I think this was a change So this was a change that they were going to add to Pally in the anniversary patch, I believe, right? But I guess they're adding it as a hotfix now. So your wall on Pally will be 30% instead of 20%. So I would say that's a good change for Holy Pally. Holy Pally is a class that I think is really squishy. It's one of the squishier healers. So your wall being more effective is something that I think is overall pretty solid for them and very, very helpful. So pretty helpful buff overall. These two changes are good for Pally, I would say, because they are kind of the squishier healer despite being plate. Sub. Reverberation damage bonus for Echoing Reprimand reduced to 70% PvP combat was base 100. So they nerfed Echoing Reprimand damage for sub. Okay. Enhanced Shaman. Holy shit. All right, well, Enhance got another... So Enhance got a lot of buffs, actually. Oh, my God. So Enhance up here. So they buffed all damage by Enhance by 4%. And then they nerfed the 2-step bonus to offset that. But then they went ahead and buffed individual spells. So Storm Strike, Wind Strike, which is just your Ascendant Storm Strike, Ice Strike, Frost Shock, Fire Nova, and Lava Lash. Okay, so Enhance got some pretty big damage buffs, I would see. Okay. Hell yeah for Enhance Shaman. Enhance gets some love. I'm telling you guys, Turbo Cleave. Turbo Cleave, I'm telling you, I've been saying Turbo all week long. Turbo is the sleeper OP comp. Telling you. Warlock Affliction. All right, so they ended up nerfing AF. Corruption damage reduced by 10%. Shadow Ball damage reduced by 15%. Unstable Affliction damage increased by 30%. Oh, okay. So they buffed UA and then they buffed UA damage and the backlash damage. I feel like nobody dispels UA anymore. So I don't know if the backlash damage matters too much, but UA did get a damage buff. So if you are able to get a UA out, then you are doing more damage. Okay. Wither damage reduced by 10% in PvP. I think this is a big deal, right? Isn't the Wither spec good? Necrolite Teachings now increase the damage of Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul by 10%. PvP combat was 20. Okay, so they had pretty big nerfs to UA lock, I would say. I feel like this is pretty big to Affliction because Affliction not only had really good rot pressure, but they had good burst damage too with their Haunt and their Shadow Bolts. So big nerf to Shadow Bolt, and they nerfed their corruption damage, which is typically like top 2, top 3 damage in their breakdown. Okay, so pretty big Affliction lock nerfs. Let's see how much it affects them. Destro, Chaos Bolt damage increased by 15%, Incinerate damage increased by 15%, Soulfire damage increased by 15%. Decimation now reduces the cast time of Soulfire by 60% in combat, was 80. Okay, so they nerfed this cast time buff. Wither damage reduced by 30% for Hellcaller, and then Ruination damage increased by 15%. Wow, so are they just making Destro lock really good again? Because Destro lock got a PvE buff too, didn't they? Damn, you know what's really funny about this? Yesterday we were talking, I think it was either yesterday morning or the morning before, and I was in Discord with Wiz, and he was saying how he really has a lot of fun on Affliction, and how he hopes that they don't buff Destro because he doesn't like playing Destro lock. Well, Wiz, if you're listening, you have to be a Destro lock. I think you should play Destro. Because they got 6% buff overall, 40% to their rifts, and then they got... All right, well, might have to play Destro. Nice. All right, sweet. So big takeaways from this. Destro got pretty big buffs. Affliction got big nerfs. Enhanced Shaman got big buffs. Holy Pally got some love. Mistweaver got a slap on the wrist for being too good in Battlegrounds. BM Hunter got a big buff. Demo Lock got a big buff. Demon Hunter was bugged. They're going to be better now. Fear Warrior got a slight nerf. Another slap on the wrist for Evokers as well, for Pres Evoker. Outlaw Rogue got a nerf as well, even though we don't really see Outlaw. Shadow Priest and Boomkin got some love. Some damage buffs and got some love. Fire Mage got some love. Not sure how they're going to be. Resto Druid got a damage buff as well as Resto Shaman. And those are kind of the big takeaways. Big takeaways. So some love across the board for a few specs and a slap on the wrist for Pres Evoker. Which we all kind of, let's be honest, guys. Who thought that they were going to nerf Pres Evoker to the ground? Nobody. Like, did anyone actually think that? I didn't think that. We saw how Dragonflight played out. I knew they weren't going to nerf Evoker to the ground. Evoker's it's their new baby, you know? It's their new baby. They got to keep it strong because otherwise nobody's going to play Evoker because the lizards are ugly. So nobody wants to play the dragons. So they got to keep them OP. All right, well, those are the changes. Crazy.